Call to order a regular meeting for the normal local liquor commission. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos,
Here.
Mr. Fritzen,
Here.
Mr. McBride,
Here.
Mrs. Cummings,
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz. Here. Mr. Preston,
Here.
Mr. McCarthy.
Here.
First order of business is to approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of July 17th, 2017, and approval of minutes of the special meeting of August 21st, 2017.
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Any changes or additions? Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen,
Aye.
Mr. McBride.
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings.
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Aye.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Mayor Coos.
Aye. The minutes are approved. We have a complaint and citation settled cases report having to do with the Kroger Limited Partnership doing business as Kroger at 1550 East College Avenue. On July 26th, Kroger furnished alcohol to a person under 21 years of age. A stipulation, guilty plea and settlement agreement was proposed for a fine in the amount of $1,000, as this was a second offense for this establishment. I entered an order of on October 11th, 2017 for the fine, which has been paid. We have a report of second installment of liquor license payments. 6 licensees elected to pay their fees in 2 installments. 4 of the license holders met their September 30th deadline, and no late fees were charged to them. The 2 remaining license holders have paid their second installment with fines, late fees. And that's our business. Are there comments or concerns on either of those issues? Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. McBride,
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings,
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Aye.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy,
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen.
Aye.
Mayor Coos.
Aye. Liquor Commission meeting is adjourned. Call to order a regular meeting for the Normal Town Council for October 16th, 2017. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos,
Here.
Mr. Fritzen.
Here.
Mr. McBride.
Here.
Mrs. Cummings.
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Here.
Mr. Preston,
Here.
Mr. McCarthy.
Here.
We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll start with public comment. We've had 2 requests to address the council tonight. The first being Ron Ulmer.
I'm Will Olin. Thank you for the opportunity to address the council. I have some brief comments regarding the sales tax sharing agreement.
Ron, could you hold for
Sure,
just
Justin.
1 second while they adjust the microphone there? We're
Oh.
not able to hear you.
If you're good.
Go ahead.
I could go back to my teacher voice, just yell at you. I came to address the council regarding the approval of the sales tax sharing agreements or the, that are on the agenda. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I taught economics at 3 Central Illinois universities. One of the basic economics principles is there's no free lunch. Yet the town claims, as in the case of Portillo's, these deals come at no cost to the citizens. Number 2, this deal is more risky than Portillo's because no prospective tenants have committed, even though one may occupy the former Dick's Sporting Goods that and has been identified. No prospective tenants are known for the open areas once Shoe Carnival and Office Depot reduced their store sizes. In today's paper, the town official states it's possible that the development may take place even if the town does not offer the $800,000 sales tax sharing. Well, that brings up an interesting question. And finally, I request an explanation of how the town can perform its fiduciary responsibility to the citizens with no town discounted cash flow scenarios shown in the council's packet. Similarly, no discounted town cash flows were shown in the council's packet for Portillo's. When I questioned this, the response was, Portillo's was a slam dunk. I hope the taxpayers do not get slammed and dunked by these deals. Thank you.
Our next public commentor is Mark Tiratilli.
Good evening, everyone. Again, a shout out to start. I really do like the signs on Constitution Trail. I live very near there. I think they're a great idea, low cost, a way of raising awareness and improving conditions with respect to existing law. So thank you. I really do like those signs out there. I want to move on to the sales tax sharing agreement. There's so many things I could talk about why I think this is a bad deal. I'm going to focus on two key areas, though, with the limited time I have. We have flawed premises here, and we have some bad data that we're trying to base policy on. So let's start off with the deal won't occur. It's one of the whereases in this ordinance. The documentation says it's just a matter of, well, it'll be less likely. There's an internal capital funding group for this company, Phillips Edison, and they just might be less likely to provide money for these renovations, but not that they won't. So I don't like the idea of being told and having you sign off on this cannot, will not occur unless we do this. That's just not true. Do you really think this property is going to sit empty with nobody in it for 10 years? Do you really think a company driven by savvy investors is going to sit by and let this asset sit? Phillips Edison is huge. They own 350 properties. Getting their data from their website, they're worth over $4 billion. They've got a $350 million line of credit that's only half used, and they just got a $200 million refinancing. They've got cash left over. They claim they're aggressively expanding. They're seeking properties that they can pay cash for, assume assets and loans. They don't need our money. They're structured as a trust, which means that all of their taxable income, more than 90% of it, is distributed as dividends to the investors so that they don't have to pay any federal income tax or corporate tax. So the money from Normal's taxpayers is going to get funneled out of here into the pockets of wealthy investors. Talk about privilege. Okay, they don't need our money. They can find a way to do this, just like the Hyatt did. The Hyatt was saying, we can't refinance unless we get your money. And then all of a sudden they heard about our position. Thank goodness they had enough insight to say, hey, you need the money more than we do. And they backed off. We need to do the same thing here. So there's other ways to do this. They could possibly do slightly less renovation. Without the town's money, you won't be imposing a project labor agreement on them. They could possibly get the work done for even less, maybe even less than it would cost them with the incentives. That's a win-win. They get it done for less, the town saves their tax money. There are other ways to make this deal happen. Let's look at some other issues here with the sales tax projections. All right, Phillips Edison estimates $8 million in year one, growing to $10.4 million by the end of 10 years. Well, of course they're going to say this. They're the ones that have the vested interest in providing that data. Let's look at the town's data. Okay, there's no justification given for their numbers. We don't even know who the tenants are. How can they claim what the sales tax is going to be? The buildings have been sitting vacant for a while. The existing tenants are downsizing, and sales taxes are down across the entire town. If we look at the town's financial report, state and local sales tax revenue, rating negative. Sales tax revenue is the largest, most critical source of revenue. If we remove the impact of the rate increase, the town has experienced a decrease in both local and state sales taxes for the past 2 years. Given the change in buying patterns of consumer shopping online and continued uncertainty with the state, we are not expecting to see significant growth in sales tax revenues. The projections are showing 3% year after year after year.
And I have to ask you to wrap it up.
That is a false premise. You cannot base public policy on such lousy data. Hats off to them for a business model that says we're going to use other people's money to finance our renovations. It's probably why they're so successful, but we should say no. Thank you.
Our next order of business is a recognition of students completing the Bloomington Normal's NAACP's Civics and Citizenship Program, and we're going to have a little explanation of that and a presentation of certificates of completion to the 6 sitting in the front row here.
Thank you to the council and mayor for allowing me to present tonight. roughly about a year ago, prior to me even taking seat on council, I worked diligently with staff within the town of Normal to build a partnership along with the NAACP. We talked about the lack of engagement or the lack of minorities being involved in civics and citizenships within this community. And we presented an opportunity to begin to share those things and also allow them the opportunity to consider careers in public administration, because as we know, that there is low numbers of minorities in those positions. I had the honor of allowing, it's actually been 7 students who have come for 3 Saturdays to participate. They did community service with the Children's Discovery Museum, as well as doing a day with the Normal Police Department, and then getting an opportunity to do a mock visioning, much like the 2040 visioning plan. I will now let them share a little bit of what they learned, and then we'll give them their certificates.
So my name is Janine Creer. I'm a junior at Normal West, and first of all, I want to thank the council for even allowing this opportunity, because before this, I really didn't have an idea of how to be involved in the community. I didn't really have an idea of what outlets I could reach in order to be a more active participant in my community. So throughout this whole journey, I practically learned just how, like my duties as a citizen and what I need to do in order to be the most effective within my community. So I just want to thank you guys for that opportunity, for being able to learn that.
Hi, my name is Mia. I'm a junior at University High School, and well, I'm not necessarily like someone who's very old to this town. I kind of moved here from Texas, and I didn't really like know much about the town, and I'm still kind of learning a little bit. So me joining the program and experiencing things and volunteering and stuff, I feel like I got a lot out of it and a lot of experience, and I felt a lot more knowledgeable after that. Like, I know more about the place I'm living in, because how are you going to live in a place that you don't know anything about? And getting to go to the police station and learn about what they do there was really fun. I mean, even if you're interested or not, it doesn't really matter. I mean, going there and learning about what they do every day and kind of just living the life of a police officer and like getting to like sit in their seats and everything. It was a really good experience, and I had fun doing it at the same time. It seems boring from the outside, but like when you go like into like the meat of it, it's actually really interesting, and I had a lot of fun, and I'm actually really glad that I did this program. I'm probably gonna keep doing it. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Come on, Carl.
Hi, my name is Jamariah Spinks. I am a senior at Normal Community West High School. So along with Janiyah and me, I had a really good experience doing this program. From the volunteering, just looking at the little kids' faces, just going through the figure eight, it made them so happy. So I'm happy I was a part of being able to help them do that. And I thank the councilman again for allowing us to do that and having this program, because I really enjoyed it. And also, just like Mia said, just seeing like the stances of the police, being in the police's seats, I think that was really good for us to see, because we've never really seen that. So overall, I just think the program was really helpful, and I'm glad I was able to be a part of it.
Come on, guys. No, come on.
So I'm gonna now present the awards. Zalali Arias. Carl Barnes. He was like that the whole program, too. She's not here. Jordan Blythe actually also participated, but she's not here tonight, but we'll make sure she gets her award. Mia Chu. Janiyah Creer. Cameron Lewis. And I called her Jay the whole entire time, Spinks. We're going to give us a moment. We're going to take a picture.
A round of applause.
Just smile at all of them.
Great.
Nice job, everybody. Go Pioneers, okay.
Congratulations, excellent. Good job.
Great job, you guys. Thank you.
Our next item would be the omnibus agenda items considered routine in nature and will be taken with one vote unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. I would like to be excused from voting on any bills I may have incurred in my duties as mayor.
I would also like to be excused for any thing I've incurred in my duties as on council.
I'd like to be excused from voting on any expenses I've incurred as my duty as councilman.
All right. Motion for approval?
Approval.
Thank you. Items on the omnibus agenda tonight are approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of October 2nd, 2017, and approval of town of normal expenditures for payment as of October 11th, 2017. A resolution to waive the formal bid process and award a contract to Game Time, care of Cunningham Associates Incorporated, for the purchase of modular playgrounds under the U.S. Communities Purchasing Program, and that's for Fell Park and Underwood Park in the amount of $112,500.74. A resolution approving the executive session meeting minutes from July 17th, August 11th, August 21st, September 18th, and October 2nd, all of 2017. A resolution conditionally approving a final plat for the J&M planned unit development, Phase 1, that's at Cottage Avenue and Village Court. A resolution conditionally approving the final plat of the re-subdivision of the One Normal Plaza planned unit development by expedited process. And that is our omnibus agenda. Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The omnibus agenda is approved. One item of general orders tonight, and that is a resolution authorizing the approval of a sales tax sharing agreements with Phillips Edison and Company for Greenbrier and College Plaza Station retail shopping centers located on Veterans Parkway.
Move approval?
Second.
Mr. Peterson, I think you
Yeah,
had
Mr.
some
Mayor,
comments.
since this is a fairly significant item, we thought we'd provide a little kind of an overview of the agreement. Scott Adair is here with Phillips Edison Company. We've been, Mr. Adair has been our primary contact, and staff has been working with Scott and some of his associates on this project for every bit of 6 months. We've been in discussions. Sally Heffern, of course, our Economic Development Director, has been the point person on those discussions. So we appreciate Mr. Adair being here to talk about not only his company, but the project that they're planning to undertake or hoping to undertake here in Normal with the two well-known shopping centers along College Avenue that this company acquired both of those fairly recently, I think 2015, and then the second one came later. We're very pleased that they are hoping to and planning to make a significant investment in both centers. Investment that will, some of those investments, what I would call building infrastructure, roof improvements, HVAC improvements, parking lot improvements. Those things don't generate much lease income, but you have to do those. The centers, both centers are pretty old buildings, particularly the one to the south that houses Bed Bath & Beyond and Shoe Carnival. That's actually a pretty old structure. Looks good on the outside, but it is in need of some significant work in terms of the infrastructure, and we're certainly pleased that the owner recognizes that and is willing to make that investment. Many of those dollars, again, don't yield additional income, but they are critical to the long-term viability of that center, both centers. And then other investments will be made to not only help to retain existing tenants, but attract new tenants to the center. So with that little bit of introduction, I'll turn it over to Sally to give a kind of an overview of the agreement, and then Mr. Adair can talk more specifically about the projects.
Good evening. I do want to make one correction, and this was my typo in the report to council. Phillips Edison acquired the Greenbrier Center, which housed the Dix, in 2013. That was a mistake on my part. I apologize. As Mark mentioned, we started meeting with Scott and several other Phillips Edison representatives in February of this year. We're excited that we had a retail center owner coming to us and wanting to, with good news. I think we all know we've had too much bad retail news in the last few years as the market has certainly tightened. I've heard a lot of positive already about things that are happening at the center. Several of you have mentioned how nice it is to be able to drive along both centers now on the frontage road, something common ownership has made possible. Also, the connection between the centers over to Susan Drive, sometimes that turn onto College, from College into the center is a little time consuming and traffic's pretty heavy, so it's nice to have a third way to get in and out of the center. As was mentioned, Phillips Edison is proposing to invest about $4.1 million in both centers. Of course, we know the Dix has been empty for some time. That's going to take some work to backfill with a retailer, and I think Scott's going to share with you a little information about that retailer tonight. $3.5 million of that investment is going to take place in the first 2 years, which is good news. That means the company is serious about getting those spaces filled. Our tax sharing agreement would be for 0.5% of 0.5% of the 1% sales tax that we get back from the state. That is our share of the state tax, which the company estimates could total about $800,000 in 10 years. Of course, if they do not, if that amount of tax is not generated, they would not receive that tax. It's performance-based incentive, and it's of course up to them, and it's in Phillips Edison's best interest to perform. Over the life of the agreement, Phillips Edison has estimated that the sales tax generated with both centers at $5.6 million. $4.8 million would be returned, of course, retained to us if that level of sales is reached, and $800,000 would be returned to Phillips Edison, about $80,000 a year over 10 years. And with that, Scott, I'd like to have you talk a little bit more about the project and some of the specifics.
Is my mic on? Okay.
It's on.
Hello, everybody. I'm thankful and grateful for the opportunity to be here and present to you on this project. I have served in public roles before, on various boards and commissions. And I appreciate your time here. I know that you're missing out on time with your family and your friends, and you're doing it because of how much you love your community. I really don't want to sell to you tonight. I want to be a source of information and answer any questions that you might have with regards to the project or Phillips Edison or what we do or who we are. I would like to address some of the comments that did come up earlier, just so that you have all the information that you need to make an informed decision. The real risk on this project, and this is why I love these public-private partnerships through these performance-based agreements. We don't reap any of the sales tax rebate or incentive if we don't perform. And so we're going to be putting a tremendous capital investment into the shopping center and spending a lot of dollars and putting all of our experts and our team on the project to make sure that we can deliver, because if we don't get the incentive. So it is performance-based. I know that there's great concern about risk to the municipality and to the community, but we're going to be taking on that risk at the beginning in the form of fronting all of the capital that's going to be needed to make all of the improvements and the incentives and the inducements that will be going to the retailers. One important thing to note is that a large portion of our budget actually goes in the form of inducements and incentives to retailers in the form of, we call it TIA, Tenant Improvement Allowance, or tenant improvements. Retail, as you know, is very competitive right now. We lost our anchor tenant, Dick's, to an adjacent community, and this happens all the time. We have a very strong relationship with a family apparel company who is very interested in the site, but they are also being courted by an adjacent community, and they're looking at other sites. We're doing everything that we can and working with your team and Sally and Mark to make sure that we secure that retailer for the town of Normal. One thing that we did is that we used your agreement. So it's your paper. We used an agreement, a template that you've used in the past that the city is comfortable with, and we work closely with Brian Day. Our council worked with Brian and made sure that all the concerns that the community might have were included in that agreement. And it was a process to go back and forth until we came to an agreement that all the parties felt comfortable with. You know, there's something we have in common. We're both residents of Normal. So we have property in Normal, and we want that property to be successful, and in order for it to be successful, Normal needs to be successful. Retailers are fickle, and they're going to go where they get the best deal. So we both share a common interest in that we want to secure the retailers for your community. And the retailer is going to chase the dollars and chase the sales, and that's why we've got to work together. This is not about a handout. It's about a partnership. We've done a lot of these before. They've been very successful. We gave Mark and Sally a list of other city managers and mayors and economic development folks who we've worked with. You're welcome to contact them if you have any questions or you're looking for references. The only other thing that I'll address, and then I'll open it up if you have any questions, about our investor base. We are a real estate investment trust. That is true. But we're not a trust that's held by a handful or even a dozen wealthy investors. We have over 40,000 investors, and most of them are retirees, retired school teachers, retired police officers. The average investment in the company is less than $100,000. These are individuals, workers in communities who take their retirement and invest it in our company. So we're not trying to make a handful of wealthy investors rich. We're trying to safeguard the retirements and the life earnings of these 40,000 plus investors who've invested in our company. And because we're a REIT, and because we have to give back so much of the dividend back to our investors, we don't have an unlimited supply of capital. We do have a strong supply of capital, and we are a very strong company, and we do have access to capital, but it's not unlimited. And where we might have 30 to 40 shopping centers in any given year that are slated for redevelopment, we might redevelop less than half, maybe a third of those. because we don't have the funding to redevelop all of the shopping centers throughout the country that need redevelopment. So where there's a public-private partnership and where the community's involved and it goes to our real estate committee, it's a huge impact, makes a big difference on getting that project approved. But I don't want to keep talking, so if you have any specific questions. Oh, what's this? Oh, yeah. Sally reminded me, and so one thing that I should explain, I'm sure a lot of you already know this. The way that real estate entities are set up, each center, each shopping center is its own legal entity. It has its own balance statement, it files its own tax return. There are certain accounting principles, general accounting principles that we have to follow. So we can't necessarily take money from a shopping center that we have in Florida, for example, and use it to spend at this center. We have to follow those accounting principles, and the center has to stand on its own legs financially. We've put a substantial investment in the shopping center already. We've spent several hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're confident that we can secure the rest of the capital that we need to make these other improvements. And again, the risk is on us. If it doesn't work, if we don't get a tenant, we spend all of the money, the city doesn't pay us anything. But do you have any questions for me about Phillips Edison or about the project or?
Questions for the developer or staff on this agreement?
If you do, you're welcome to go to our website, phillipsedison.com. A lot of information there about what we've done in the past, similar projects. Or I'm sure if you have questions about the company or the projects in general, I'm sure you can reach out to Sally and she can give you my contact information. I'm happy to talk to anybody.
Ms. Lorenz, we'll start with you.
Scott, correct?
Yes.
I do have a question, I guess, of clarification. Will this or will it not happen without public participation? Because I guess I'm hearing a couple of different versions of that.
Well,
what was
we're gonna
reported
do-
in the paper versus what is in our packet.
Sure, and I'm not sure, so I read some of the articles in the paper, and I don't know where they got some of the information that they got. We do not have a finalized deal yet. So this will have a huge impact on our ability to secure that and finalize that, and then to move forward with the project and put retailers into the property. That does not mean that if you vote no, that we're going to not try to secure the tenant. Of course we would. That's in our best interest. But it means that now we're much more limited in our resources and our ability to do so. Tenant rent is based on construction costs. So the higher our construction costs, the higher rent we have to charge the tenant. So if our construction costs are here, we have to put our rent here so that we can make that up. These rebates, these performance agreements allow us to artificially reduce those costs, which allow us to give the tenant a better deal. And that's how you're competing with other communities who are doing the same thing. There are other communities who are trying to offer the same types of programs to attract retailers. So I apologize, I can't give you a definitive answer, but that's the honest answer, is that we will, of course, still try to continue. We're not going to give up on the center. We want to do what we can to put tenants and retailers there, but it's very challenging, and everyone's competing, not just developers, but communities, to try to pull retailers to their communities. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. McCarthy?
So just a quick follow-up on that. So what you're saying is you're going to use some of the money that you generate, because this isn't our money. It's money that your retailers will generate, and then hopefully it becomes our money from taxes. So you're going to take some of that rebate to attract new retailers to the center.
Correct.
To keep them from going some of the, you mentioned, adjacent communities. So we have a better competitive advantage to be able to attract and retain and keep new retailers in our site. Do I understand that?
In some cases, we've had to turn that right over to the retailers. They've asked for it. It's very common for a retailer to ask for a check. Or we can use it to offset our construction costs, to lower the rent basis for the retailer. It's really deal specific. It's not taking the rebate and sending it back to our investors.
So you're investing locally?
Correct, yeah.
Mr. McBride?
Scott, thanks for being here tonight. Kind of picking up where my colleague left off. So if you're proposing to invest an additional $4.1 million in improvements to the retail centers over the next 5 years. It seems to me probably safe to assume that that means some construction work. That means some money that's being spent by your organization in this community, correct?
So we handle all of our project management internally, and then we hire local area GCs and contractors. All of our vendors are landscapers, plumbers, HVAC companies. They're all local. We don't self-perform the actual work, but we do self-perform on the project management. So that's one thing that we had a great deal of discussion about, and we were vetting out, some of the different laws and labor issues, because we'll be looking at sourcing and identifying vendors here and contractors locally.
So much for the idea of all the money leaving the community. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Day?
Just to clarify on Mr. McCarthy's point about attracting new retailers, the deal is structured in this so that the rebate only would apply to new retailers. So it's not any of the existing tenants, anything that's currently being generated on the site would not go towards the incentive. It is only the attraction of new retailers who are not currently on the site now.
Yeah, it has to be new plus. So we couldn't use it to do a remodel for Shoe Carnival, for example, because you're not really gaining any additional sales tax benefit from that. So it's truly about new retailers to the market.
I think that's an important point to clear up again, that
Thank you, Mr.
the only dollars can be spent on the new retailers that come in.
First of all, I would like to say thank you for the presentation and being available to answer any questions that we may have.
Absolutely.
It's interesting, we've kind of talked about a couple of different things that have been of concern of mine, so thank you to my colleagues for asking some of those questions. But also I wanted to know, there's a couple things that I've got tons of notes here, just because I want to make sure that we paint the best picture and make the best decision possible for our community. My first question will kind of piggyback. I want to make sure, I know it won't be spent only on the local retailer, the upcoming retailers, but does the total that we're looking for, so that amount that we're looking to reach, I think it was, I've got so many numbers here at this point. I want to say 4.8, I think is what it was that you have to get to, or maybe 5.6. Is that including what's currently there? Like, is it the collective revenue or just of the new ones that we're looking to get? That's my first question.
Sure. So if I understand your question correctly, and Brian might understand the contract better and might be able to jump in, but it's like a sliding scale. So if less sales tax is generated, we're not going to get the cap. So the 800,000 is the not to exceed number. So if
And that's based strictly on new retail
Yeah,
revenue.
and not existing.
It doesn't include existing retailers. So the 5.6 million is the estimated sales tax generated, total sales tax generated by new retailers.
My second question is, I've done a lot of research on public-private partnerships just because of the lack of enthusiasm for our community to understand where the nation is going right now with public and private partnerships. Just in your experience, this type of because the sales tax rebate is just one of the many types that they do. There's numerous ways that they do this. At this level, is this kind of a common one, and this is why you felt more comfortable approaching this, or which kind of agreements do you come into most commonly when you work with public-private partnerships?
we've entered into other sales tax rebate agreements with municipalities in the state of Illinois. We have 15 centers in Illinois, one that we just acquired this year. So this is an important market to us, and we have found that in the state of Illinois, sales tax rebate agreements seem to be the prerogative because it's the least amount of risk for the municipality, because it's all based on performance. So it defers a lot of the risk back to the developer. So we have to ensure that we have to front all of the money, the capital initially, to do all the construction and make all the improvements. And then we have to secure the retailer. And then we have to work with the retailer and make sure we're a good landlord and that we're doing what we need to at a shopping center level so that they're a successful retailer. So that's more than just the project. That means managing the property well, having a good, courteous property management staff, working with them on accounting issues if they come up. We just have to be a good partner with the retailer in general. Because if we don't, then we're not going to see any of that incentive come back. So it really puts the carrot out there for us to chase after. We recently executed a sales tax rebate agreement, similar somewhat to the one that is structured here just this year in the state of Texas, in a community in Texas. So I am seeing that a lot more communities are interested in using this form of incentivizing these types of relationships. And I'm a sucker for public-private partnerships. I love them. I think that it's just about leveraging resources. So you've got some resources, I've got some resources, and we both have a shared need, a big empty retail facade. And how can we work together to solve that?
Now, my last question, I'm going to ask you to dig deep here.
Okay.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
You know, just from your exchanges thus far with those who might be interested in moving into the location, give you a scale 1 to 5, 1 being the least likely ever considering to move into the location, with and without the rebate, and then 5 being the most. What does your gut tell you, based off of just your experience in the business, having as many, the ones that you're looking at, you don't have to disclose that, but just what does your gut tell you, with and without?
Okay, so if I understand, you want me to rate the odds, basically, of...
The chance of it.
Well, unfortunately, our organization is somewhat siloed. So the real estate executive committee, the construction teams, the leasing teams, they all operate on their own teams. And so I'm much more of an expert when it comes to these public-private partnerships, not so much an expert on drafting lease language. I don't think I could fairly throw a percentage out at it, but I can say that I have equally seen both. I have seen these agreements fail to pass, but then the retail deal still moves forward and the tenant still moves into the space. I've also seen these agreements fail to pass and then it causes the deal to die because now we can no longer afford the deal. So I've seen both happen. I guess what I can default back to, though, so you could look at 2 scenarios, with or without the incentive. With the incentive, it's not going to be a stressed deal. Without the incentive, even if it moves forward, it's going to be a stressed deal. And I'm sure everyone knows and has experienced that any capital venture needs to be funded properly, or the risk of failure is very high. And so we don't want to move into a project and underfund it. And it's more difficult to squeak a project through and cut corners, and maybe we're not going to do as much work, or maybe we're not going to paint the facade, we're going to just leave it as it is to do everything we can to reduce costs. When we partner with the community, we can give them the full package that they're looking for. And some of the things that we're looking at doing, and maybe you're not aware, and it should be shared with you because we shared it with Mark and Sally, but we're looking at, because of the funding from this project, we're looking at other upgrades to the property, lighting upgrades, landscape upgrades, sign upgrades, asphalt upgrades. That's going to benefit the other retailers, not just the new retailer that we're trying to bring into the property. And not only will it benefit the other retailers, but it's going to help with the vibrancy of that retail corridor. So it depends on where you fall on this argument. You know, economic developers have different theories here, but when you put money into an investment, it really does start to create new opportunity. And that's what we're trying to do here. So that's the difference. If I know I didn't give you a number, I'm sorry, but that's my honest answer to you, though. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Fritzen.
I've got some comments I'll save for later, but 800. Where does $800,000 come from? How do you land at $800,000?
The industry standard for these agreements is a 20% contribution. So the developer puts in 80%, and then the offset is 20%. So we just came up with it because it's a standard that a lot of communities use.
And that is true. We've done more, depending on the circumstance and depending on the deal. And at the end of the day, the numbers have to work for everybody. They have to work for the developer, they have to work for the retailer. It's irrelevant how successful the developer is. We hope it's a successful developer. That's a good thing. You want a developer and a center owner that's stable and successful. But at the end of the day, they have to look at this individual deal and do the numbers work. And in this day and age, particularly with retail, the numbers are tight. Retailers are, particularly ones that are expanding, and the one retailer that the company's identified, and they believe, I think they have a belief that if this deal is done, they can make this work. But the retailers that are expanding know they are in a very strong bargaining position, because most of them are not. And if you look around our community, there are lots of vacancies. So there are lots of choices. So they're going to go in and demand a certain lease rate that they think is competitive. And a company like Phillips Edison has got to determine how do they deliver that lease rate and still maintain a profitable project. And so it comes down to that sort of an analysis of how can the numbers work. They've shared with us, with this ratio, they believe, and it's not signed yet, that's important, but they believe that based upon the conversations they had with this one particular retailer, they've given us the sense that they believe strongly that they can make this deal happen. If they don't make it, and it's possible that it won't happen. If it doesn't happen, then we don't owe them anything. You know, there's no, if they don't generate the revenue, we don't owe them anything. So it is up to them to perform. If they perform, they get the benefit of a rebate. If they don't, then we're back to where we are today. And we hope that's not the case, because we want them to be successful. We want them to perform. And that's really what this is all about.
I'm fine with it, unless anybody else has other questions there.
Mr. McBride?
I've got some
I have
comments.
comments, not questions, so.
Questions?
Comments, but
Comments?
I'll hold till questions are
I've got,
answered.
Mayor, I've got
Sure.
one question. It's for staff, though. A couple questions and points that have been brought up so far have revolved around the concept of, without town assistance, and actually it's in our resolution, it's the sixth clause down on what we're voting tonight, whereas without the town's assistance, the developer would not undertake the project. Question for staff, I guess, in light of that is, taking a step back from just this specific issue, as a general practice, what do we do to verify, or what kind of supporting documentation do we require, or is it just that a developer will, say that when these kind of opportunities come to us that, well, without the assistance, we can't undertake it, and then we, just kind of take it at that and trust it, or where?
Well, I would say, first of all, that provision in the whereas clause is probably an overstatement. I think what we've said consistently in the report, in interviews with media, and at this meeting today, that the lack of public assistance is going to probably make it more difficult for this to happen. So there's a risk. There's a risk involved. One might say, I'm going to gamble that they're going to do it anyway, and I'm not going to give them any money, and then we jeopardize potentially $4.8 million in new revenue. I think it's pretty clear to me, given the environment that retail is operating in today and what they're demanding, that a little bit, and this isn't a terribly rich incentive program package. It's, in the grand scheme, it's $80,000 a year for 10 years roughly. That is going to increase the likelihood of this whole deal happening, which will ultimately effectively backfill the Dick's space with a retailer that will generate as much, if not more, sales tax than we were getting from Dick's, which is a big win, as well as some important investment in the two existing centers to ensure their vitality long term. This company, they've got 300 centers around the country. They could say, we're not going to put a lot of money in this center right now because it's questionable whether we can make money there. And I'm probably more excited about the fact that they're putting investment in things like roof systems and HVAC systems and parking lots and landscaping and those kinds of things that, to me, sort of give me a sense that this center is going to be around and it's a viable center and they're going to insure it. I'm as excited about that as I am the investment they're making in attracting new retailers. They're both important. So, Mr. Preston, to answer your question, we don't have the knowledge to know the answer to that question absolutely. But based upon what we're seeing in not only in our community but other communities, this is standard practice. There is not a significant retail development along Veterans Parkway that has not benefited from a public-private partnership of some sort. None. They all have. Bloomington and Normal. Sam's Club, it's hard to argue, does Walmart need more money? Sam's Club and both Walmarts got fairly significant incentives to locate because that made the deal work for them. Shops at College Hills, Menards, Home Depot, up and down the line. That's really that's SOP today for retail. And they expect that there is going to be some public participation, whether it's to the developer or whether it's directly to the retailers. So what Phillips Edison is requesting is very standard today. And given the fact that the few retailers that are looking to come into our market and expand, and there are few, it's kind of a buyer's market. So they have a variety of choices in locations, and most all the developers are offering some sort of incentives through public-private partnerships. That's why Dick's left. That's part of the reason why Dick's left. They wanted bigger space, but they got a public-private partnership. They benefited from a public-private partnership in the city of Bloomington. I don't blame Bloomington for doing what they're doing. They did a major shopping center overhaul and refresh, and every one of those tenants benefited from a public-private partnership. It's really no different than what's happening here. But I can't crawl in their head and give you absolute guarantee that without this incentive, it won't happen. But we certainly think with this package, it will certainly enhance the project as been described, and it will, I feel pretty comfortable that it will happen with this incentive package. But even then, there's no guarantee. But then, of course, we wouldn't owe them anything if they don't generate the sales tax. So that's the best answer I give. But I can't sit here today and say absolutely unequivocally it will not happen if you don't approve this package, because there is a possibility that it could. But they're sharing with us that they think with this incentive package, the chances of making this work are greatly enhanced, and that makes sense to me, and I believe what they say.
Further questions? Or Mr. McBride?
Comments.
Comments?
Good for. All right, so I wanted to read a sentence from our report tonight, and I believe this will be the 7th or 8th time that this has been mentioned tonight, but I want to reinforce it. Phillips Edison is requesting a 50% rebate of the 1% state sales tax generated by the replacement tenant in the former Dick's lease space and new national tenants in the newly created spaces in College Plaza Center resulting from the downsizing of Shoe Carnival and Office Depot. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but 50% of 0 is 0. So there is no risk for us here financially with this deal. There is risk, as has been stated once before, should we turn this down, because the deal is less likely to happen. And I suppose that's a risk we could take. I also think it's worth noting that the town employs subject matter experts, like Ms. Heffernan, in any number of areas. Hers is economic development. And I find it disappointing when people make unilateral declarations about flawed data and bad premises. And I know that we live in charged times, and those kinds of proclamations are in vogue, but it does not make them any more responsible. Thank you.
Mr. Fritzen?
Yeah, Mr. Peterson referred to a couple of things that I had jotted down here as I was listening to the presentations, but I think it is important to note that there is a growing number of empty buildings along Bloomington Normal's Main Street, Veterans Parkway. Became known as the Twin Cities Main Street, and it's interesting that I thought that today, driving down Veterans Parkway, noticing some of these things, because when things like this are on our agenda, you become more sensitive to some of those things. And not only empty buildings, but, a shopping center that, I am a townie. I've lived here my whole life. I went from going back to school shopping in downtown Bloomington and downtown Normal to a high schooler hanging out on Friday nights, let's go to the mall just to kill time. And I realize those days are moving on, because there's a life cycle to these things. And yet, those are challenges. Our community's challenged when it comes to, keeping those types of spaces filled. So, there in addition, along frontage roads, there's some properties that have been raised. So there's some empty properties sitting there now, and you scratch your head and you wonder what's next for that. We need to be alert and aware of that type of thing and be watching for opportunities. As Mr. Peterson said, when somebody is interested in investing in your community, you don't take that lightly. And you mentioned Dick's, that's the anchor that has revitalized one of those properties that was at great risk. Hy-Vee has filled the space that was occupied by Kay's Merchandise and empty for a long time. Prior to Kay's Merchandise, it was Walmart. So there's turnover in these shopping areas as well. And again, you go to you're talking, Scott, about liking the public-private partnerships. We had a public-private partnership in place that even predates my service on the council. The College Hills Mall, not the shops at College Hills, but the College Hills Mall, the first time that the town entered into one of these sales tax rebate agreements. And again, it had a timeline assigned to it, and that mall actually outperformed the timeline. That obligation was paid off before we got to the end of that timeline. But I was elected in 1983, so that predates 1983 that the town of Normal's been involved in this type of thing. As Mr. Peterson said, it's standard operating procedure today, but we were, I don't know if we were ahead of our time, but we certainly saw the need at that time to expand commercial tax base in Normal to get out of being a residential community and a public sector community with the university sitting in the middle of it. We needed to generate real estate tax, we needed to generate sales tax, and Normal went out and did that. It's interesting you said this, and I had jotted it down, that Phillips Edison has options. This property is competing with others in their own portfolio for investment dollars. So just because you have lots of properties doesn't mean you're able to put lots of money into every single one of those properties. You're competing internally. You said that yourself, with other properties in their own portfolio to determine where are the investment dollars going to go. And this is a pretty modest agreement that is going to incentivize your property people saying, Normal wants us, we want Normal, we have a good opportunity here, let's see if those things can coalesce and make this happen. So, yes, we need to boost sales tax. Yes, our data shows that. Yes, our financial reporting to us has been telling us that. And yes, we've taken notice of that. That's why we do annual reports and have our finance person come every fall and tell us what what our performance indicators are. It helps us decide how to approach situations and opportunities like this. Those are not surprises to us. We do a great job of, as a staff here, telling the public body, here's what you're dealing with, and here are things you need to take into consideration when opportunities present themselves. So it's not the case was made for doing this, not avoiding this by the speaker earlier. This could possibly this not only would protect a sales tax generator, but possibly boost our sales tax revenue, and that represents a public strategy that Normal has used to its advantage, and probably probably really much of our ability to weather the current economic situation is a result of those types of agreements that have been made over the years. You know, we aren't sitting, we're challenged, but we're not sitting in on the precipice. And part of the reason for that is these types of agreements have served us well over the years. So it's an effective strategy, and it's worked in the past. There's no reason it can't work today. Now, when it comes to the internal workings and performance of a developer, the only thing I care about is if they're trustworthy. Are you trustworthy?
Yes.
You know, that's what that's what I want to know. I want you to be profitable. I want you to be wildly profitable, okay? Because that's who I want to do business with. I don't want to go into business with somebody who's you know, on the edge of failing, or that this is a desperation move. Why would I want to go into business with somebody like that? I want to go into business with somebody who is profitable, who is successful, and if $80,000 a year of a sales tax rebate over a 10-year period is going to help your investors, fine, that's great. Because in the meantime, we're getting the benefit of that. So, you know, some of the logic that is presented to say no, 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 no all the time is flat out false, and it's time. You know, I'm speaking up a little louder tonight. I spoke up loudly a few months ago because people are being misled by others because they just want to say no, no, no all the time. You know, and yeah, we say yes quite often, but you know what? One reason we say yes often to things that are at the table is because the things we aren't interested in never get on our agenda. It's not that we never say no, okay? There was a reference earlier to some, you know, that decision by another developer earlier was influenced by comments that came from this body. You know, so we don't put it on the agenda so we can sit here and wrestle over it and have a 5-2 vote or a 4-3 vote in favor or against something. What's to be gained by that? You know, nothing. But tonight, we're going to vote on this. If it's unanimous in favor, everybody will say, "Oh, there they go again, rubber stamping what the city administration wants." No, that's not it at all. The city administration understands what the policymaking body has a taste for and a willingness to do, and they present these opportunities to us, okay? And we will vote on an opportunity to help Normal and to address some of what our challenge is when it comes to sales tax revenue. And that's the lifeblood of our operation. It's become that. It wasn't that at one time, but it has become that because back in the 1970s, somebody had the foresight to start doing this kind of thing. And today we have an opportunity. We do not have the length of Veterans Parkway, most of it does not lie in the town of Normal. And this is a critical piece of property for the town of Normal. And you know, I'm thrilled that there's one owner now of the whole thing, for one thing, because how many of us have driven into that parking lot and, man, I wish I could get over there a lot easier so I could, you know, do this. And, you know, that's going to happen. And hopefully some big things happen there. So be successful.
Mr. McCarthy?
Scott, thanks for coming and being in the hot seat tonight.
Sure.
I'm sure these are always interesting meetings when you go to do this. I want to echo my wishes for your wild success in the town of Normal, and thanks for letting me drive from one to the next. Got a truck, but now it's easier. Reading this and listening to my fellow council persons ask questions and make comments, and with an ancient history and finance and accounting, I look at these mostly from a purely business perspective, and spending some years in the investment business as well. It seems to me that we're being asked to be a partner in investing in our local community. But we're being asked slightly differently. We're not being asked to come up with a bunch of cash up front to be a partner in that investment. It seems to me that we're being asked to share in the proceeds of that investment if it pays off. And that the downside risk is really no financial downside risk, is that the only time Philip Edison is going to get a rebate is if we're earning sales tax well in excess of that rebate. And so it seems to me that this particular form of public-private partnership is in our best interest to partner with Philip Edison to try to invest in our community and the health of our retail sector as long as we can support it and as long as it's in this state. What I do think the risk is to our community is that if we do say no and we sit by and watch all the communities around us go out and be competitive and compete for retailers, as shrinking as that space may be currently, but go out and compete to bring them to their doors and their open retail space, and we sit by and do nothing to be competitive. I think that is the risk to the town of Normal. Thanks.
Ms. Lorenz?
I've got a couple of comments and kind of directed a couple different directions. First, for one of our public commenters, the financial reports, some of the trend analysis stuff that we look at and are provided by our finance department, those charts are given a rating of positive, negative, and I think caution. And I guess I just want to caution the commenter and really anybody who can go out and perhaps look at this information that let's not take those ratings out of context. A negative rating was put there, and I believe I understand why it was. The negative rating, I think, was in regards to the direction of sales tax revenue, I think was the reference. And it's no surprise that online sales are cutting into brick and mortar sales. And so I don't want us to, like I said, take out of context and blow out of proportion those ratings. Those ratings are there to mean to send us as a council a message of what are the issues that we need to be taking notice of. And, revenue generated from utility tax is one. I don't want to go really deep into those details, but I just want to caution other consumers of that information to not take those ratings out of context. They are meant to serve as directional indicators and not as a goodness or badness rating. So that's one thing I guess I want to comment about. The next thing, Scott, to you, I am concerned, it strikes a nerve in me that an adjacent city may be looking at one of the more lucrative tenants. And that strikes a nerve with me because we have, informally at least, in this Twin City, talked about circumventing the back and forth pull between retailers. And so it bothers me to think that I may be making a decision because the adjacent city may come in and take this one away. And that, I think, is a downward spiral. And I want to bring up the point to anybody listening that our communities really should look at a shared sales tax. We might not have an empty Dick's store, what once was a Dick's Sporting Goods store, had we had a shared sales tax, because there might not have been that desire to pull them across Division Street or to the southern part of Veterans Parkway. Granted, they wanted extra space. Who's to say that the town of Normal couldn't have provided them that? And I think some of that competition has not served our community well. That's not your concern, I realize. It is ours up here, and it is our counterparts in Bloomington. So I raise that point just because it strikes a nerve for me that doesn't set real well. So shared sales tax is something I think we need to keep in a headline. And then lastly, I guess I want to just say that I may be one of the more concerned and negative-leaning thoughts or opinions on this topic tonight, because as I drove past that property today, who wouldn't want to move in next to Panera? You know, I mean, I sit in Panera sometimes and it's like, my goodness, why didn't I invent this place? That place is hopping all the time. Take note of the fact that we have invested in our portion of Veterans Parkway. I think we did a very good thing on the corner of Veterans and College to significantly upgrade the performance of that corner with the introduction of a Illinois homegrown restaurant in the form of Portillo's. Who wouldn't want to be across the street from Portillo's? We have invested handsomely in the infrastructure to pave the way, literally, for a homegrown business in the form of Distill Brewery on Greenbrier Drive. They are a homegrown company, and from all accounts that I can see when I go there at different times of the day and different days of the week, that place is attracting a really interesting and diverse group of customers, from empty nesters to young families. I'm really happy for him. So we have, as a council, and councils before me sitting here, have invested handsomely in our portion of our main street of Veterans Parkway. And I would hope that your investors and your real estate investment group would take note of the really prime piece of real estate. I'm sure that's why they bought it in the first place in 2013. And I think no matter what, under any circumstances, you will do just fine there.
Ms. Cummings and then Mr. Preston.
I just have a few comments. What I would like to share is that for those who are listening and those who may read about it tomorrow in the paper, for some reason, when we talk taxes, it's automatically considered a curse word, a dirty word, an egregious word. It is the way that we make money as a community. It's a way for opportunities. The more I studied this information, one thing I realized is I thought about it more as an investment. As somebody, I don't have a large portfolio, by no means. I've got something really, really super small. But I looked at it like my portfolio. Yes, I put money into it, and the person who administers it gets a portion. It's just that simple. They get a percentage of it. But they only get a percentage based off of what I make off my portfolio. And when I started to take a look at this and compare it to that, when it was, I understood, and I'm somebody who, I can't speak for everybody, but I will read and ask 50 million questions. And one of the things that is most important to me is this community. I want this community to thrive. I think for me, my ultimate would be that we would be a destination place. Might not be a Chicago's destination place, but a place that people want to come to, want to visit, whether it's a day trip or an overnight trip. It's a place people want to be. And so I don't make anything or take anything lightly. And I research and I read, and I probably bug Mark more than anybody else because I'm gonna ask the questions. And I know sometimes he wants to know, where do I get the questions from? Because I wanna make sure that I'm making the best decision possible. We have to be open to where also some of the trends are going. I had to look to see what communities are doing. And I asked even some people who I know who are in the local municipal sections across this country, as I've been able to start to build some partnerships. And just, what are you doing? how are you making it possible? Recently went back to a place that I'm familiar with, and I had to ask them because they're a lot like this community, a small community, a college town, and they've got things everywhere. And I mean, people are moving there and they're putting up new houses and new developments. And my question was, what did you do? Nothing no different than what Normal's trying to do. And so I think we have to sometimes be open. And it's almost like any parent, understanding we're going to try to make the very best decision we possibly can for this community. I think these things like this is what keeps most of us up overnight, trying to make sure that we're not putting anyone in harm's way. We live here. We also live here and are a part of this community. I don't have children yet, but I want to have children, and I want to make sure that I have something to give to them and something that they can be proud of. And I think that we're doing that, and I think we're doing it in a responsible way. We just have to keep our eyes open. And I'm right there with you, Jeff, when you says, I want to know that you're going to be successful and you're in it for the right reasons. I watch a lot of American Greed. And believe you me, I know about people who want to swindle places out of money and have seen it. But when I know that you've got a desire and you want to be here and you want to make the right decisions, then I can support that.
Mr. Preston?
Thanks, Mayor. It's been interesting discussion. I feel like there have been a lot of good points, a number of which I maybe haven't thought about before coming into this conversation tonight. And so I kind of go back and forth on this a little bit. So I like to some of the previous comments, certainly that it is a rebate. Rather than any investment out of pocket from the town of Normal. The people of Normal, I like that the rebate is focused on and directly tied to new retailers coming to the space rather than the entire properties. I think that that's very fitting, and like the structure of the deal from those two standpoints, for sure. But I just kind of keep coming back to a couple different things, and one, a lot of some of the points that have been made here tonight that I've heard, I feel like are tied to the premise that this investment won't happen without our incentive and without our rebate. And while we've talked about that before, one of the points that is important to remember is whether or not the investment by Phillips Edison happens into these properties or not is entirely within the control and is entirely the decision of Phillips Edison, right? I mean, that it's an internal decision as to whether or not this investment is made, and it's not as though the decision could not be made to make the investment without our incentive. That's a decision that's held internally to the company. Another thing that I think differentiates this proposal to maybe some of the others that we've seen where we have provided public assistance and incentives on is the concept of building something out of nothing and working with a developer who has yet to purchase a property or land that they then want to develop into something productive, which it currently isn't. In the case here, Phillips Edison has owned these properties. They currently do. I think our primary focus here being the one that has Dick's in it since 2013. They have a vested interest in filling that Dick's space, whether we are involved or not, because they own the property and they're running the business. They certainly have a vested interest not to just leave that vacant and not put effort into doing what they can to lure a national tenant into the space, or multiple, depending on how it's all broken up. And, I guess I'd probably be more open, if this were to come to us tonight and it were to, instead of, looking at the Dick's space and, if we were looking at, hey, we have some extra parking lot space and we want to develop an outlot or two. We want to put, smaller buildings and, attract new tenants out closer to the Veterans Parkway frontage, building something out of nothing. I think I'd probably feel more comfortable with it. But because of the dynamics that we're looking at tonight, it's just something that ultimately I feel is not in the best interest of the people involved.
Further comments, Mr. Peterson?
I just want to, Mr. Fritzen and Ms. Cummings made a comment, I just, regarding credibility and integrity of the company. And Mr. Fritz, you said, I want you to be successful, I also want you to be honest. And I just want to, that's an important point, and because we've not had a long associations with Phillips Edison, but I will tell you, during all of our conversations, I've been very impressed with the fact that they've been very open and I believe honest. The one retailer, and we seem to be focusing a lot on one retailer, and I just want to remind, this is much bigger than just one retail space. But the one retailer that they've shared with us, and they said these are the sales projections, we researched those through multiple sources and they were spot on. There was no inflation of the, and that sometimes happens. We get, oh, this is what you're going to get. We do a little research and we have to pull that back. They were spot on with what they had given us for a projection, but this is the tipping point in my mind. One of the things early on, they said with the College Plaza Station Center, you know, as you go to the north, the south end of that center, there's in front of Office Depot and Petco, there's stairs. There's a grade change. And one of the things they said early on is we want to take all that out. We want to make all this accessible, universally accessible. And our response was, you don't have to do that. It meets code. And they're talking about spending over $400,000 on making that accessible. And they said, yeah, but that's not consistent with the values of our company. And we believe in accessibility for everybody, even though we don't have to do it. And I'll guarantee you they won't get a nickel more of a lease income from it. But they said, no, this is something that's a priority of ours. We want to make that center fully accessible, get rid of those stairs. And that's not going to be an easy, that's not an easy fix. There's going to have to be a lot of work done on that front end to make that happen. They've said, you know, $460,000 for facade. Much of that is for this whole, what they call an ADA improvement, which I found quite remarkable because few developers would undertake something of that expense when they didn't have to. Most developers, and I'm not bad-mouthing developers, but they'll try to find a way to get out of it. Do we absolutely have to do it? Is there a way that we can interpret the code that allows us to not make that expense? But they said, no, this is part of our company's values, and we're going to spend the money, and we want to do that. And that, to me, says a lot about the integrity of this particular organization. And it made me feel even better as we continued our discussions about trying to work out some sort of partnership, because the one thing that we know is when you enter into partnership, you want to have a partner you can trust and a partner that can deliver. And that's just one small example that I think they've demonstrated that they're a trustworthy company with high integrity and high credibility because they're willing to undertake an expense that they don't have to for the right reasons. And so I think that, to me, spoke to particularly Mr. Fritz and Ms. Cummings, your question about credibility and those kinds of things. So I just wanted to share that with you. And just to remind you, this is more than just one retail space. This is an investment in both centers. And sure, we'll benefit from sales taxes, we hope, but also I think we benefit from making sure that those centers are being well maintained, and they're going to be around for a number of years, much longer, because the company is paying attention to the guts of the buildings. And sometimes those don't, sometimes the owners don't make those investments. Those are hard investments to make when they don't generate an immediate return, and I'm pleased that these guys are willing to do that. That's all, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments? Please call the roll.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
No.
Mr. Preston?
No.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. Thank you for the discussion tonight, Council. Again, I guess my shortest comment would be this discussion was another stellar example of why this body works so well, and I'm proud to be part of it. We have one item of new business, and that is a motion to receive the 20 years material recovery and resource solid waste management plan for McLean County, Bloomington, and Normal, Illinois. Presenting will be Michael Brown from the Ecology Action Center.
And as Michael gets settled, let me just point out, he's presenting this plan today, this draft plan. The motion, and really, you can pass a motion or not, it's really a presentation. This will come back to you at some point once it has gone through this 90-day review period. This item will come back to you for formal action, as it will the county board and the city of Bloomington. But Michael is presenting it to you this evening and looking for some initial comments, knowing that we will be getting a lot more comments from the general public as this is rolled out to the community. So you will see this again at some point in the future, but this is kind of an initial peek, not unlike the comprehensive plan presentation earlier. This is an initial peek, and it's an opportunity for you to provide some initial feedback, but rest assured that you'll have the opportunity to see this again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, members of the council. I'll try and keep this brief, but yes, this is just kind of a first peek and opportunity to hear about our efforts towards a new community-wide solid waste management plan, opportunity to answer any questions here up front. Real briefly, just a little bit of background and context on this entire process and history of waste management for our community. So very first recycling effort started here in Bloomington Normal in 1971, a one-day recycling drive that led to the creation of Operation Recycle, which was essentially the predecessor of the Ecology Action Center. Initially was a project under Mid-Central Community Action, eventually was a separate nonprofit for a few decades, provided recycling services for the local community. Eventually in the 1990s, the municipalities did take on the role of recycling along with their waste services. So at that time, the Ecology Action Center kind of branched out. We had already been doing a lot of education and outreach, started doing that more formally for the local governments, eventually taking on the role of the solid waste agency for the community. We've actually, for the past couple solid waste plan updates, which are mandated by the state of Illinois, we've been preparing those as a solid waste agency for the community. And here we are now in 2017, preparing now this new solid waste management plan proposal. Our solid waste services are diverse, including everything from education and outreach and kind of acting as that information center for the community, classroom presentations, household hazardous waste collection. Now we're online with a smartphone app, Recycle Coach, which you should all check out if you have not already. This is 24-hour access to recycling information and a lot more other services that we do provide. So the background for this process in terms of the state mandates, Illinois Solid Waste Planning and Recycling Act does require that counties have a solid waste management plan. Traditionally, this is usually done in cooperation with local municipalities, as that's where the bulk of the population usually is, and waste management services are usually provided often by the municipalities in the community. So McLean County Solid Waste Management Plan was first approved in 1991. Per the mandate of the Solid Waste Planning and Recycling Act. It's been updated every 5 years since then. As I mentioned, the Ecology Action Center providing last few updates, getting us here to the near present, where in 2015, as we saw that the 2017 update would be needed, it was decided instead of doing that 5-year update that we would start from scratch, that the context, that everything, all the important variables that had been there in 1991 have now changed in terms of technology, behaviors, understanding commodity markets, everything that is relevant to solid waste management has changed significantly since 1991. So a new 5-year update would just be a Band-Aid as opposed to really addressing the longer-term waste management needs for our community. So we have, since 2015, been working on a proposed new 20-year solid waste management plan. One of the important variables that has changed, probably the most significant that has changed, is landfill capacity in our community. So you can see here from this chart, landfill capacity has been declining dramatically for years, and we've been monitoring this closely. I've actually come to this council multiple times in the past and actually told you about this. We are now at the very close to the end here. The end is very near. Essentially, we're looking at sometime in the first quarter of 2018 that the McLean County landfill will likely reach capacity and begin its closure processes. So is this a crisis? Well, in fact, there's plenty of landfill capacity in East Central Illinois. These just show some of the landfills around the area. And then looking here, we can look at the capacity and expected life capacity or lifespan of those landfills. These estimates here actually are conservative in some cases. I know that the Livingston County landfill, I believe, is more like 30 to 40 years of capacity left, not just the 21.2 that, or 21.9 that is shown there on the chart. So with this being one of the bigger variables that really underlying our work, we've been working for the past 2 years, a lot of research, a lot of outreach, stakeholder groups, focus groups, field trips to really learn, what we need to know as far as the current state of things, current issues, and options going forward for our community, especially as we are soon to become a post-landfill community. So this here, we just look briefly at kind of the timeline of where we've been and where we're going. We have already taken this to the county's land use committee, and now we're into this 90-day public comment period. And so we're taking it around 2 different bodies to be able to give it some exposure and address any questions, but also look for feedback on this. We will eventually be coming back around to the Normal County Council for formal approval in early January before sending this to the Illinois EPA for the final approval. So one of the other variables that thankfully is on our side here, if we look at recycling rates over the past many years, this chart showing us the past 14 years of recycling rates, and this is the amount of waste, total waste generated by our community, our county as a whole, and what percentage of that has been recycled. We've actually had a goal since 2002 of 40%. We've been working towards that goal. And we've made some progress and we've slid back, but finally here in 2016, we met and exceeded that goal, which puts us in a really good place to now look at more ambitious goals for the next 20 years. Some of the other data we've looked at in order to develop the new solid waste management plan is what are we actually throwing away? And so this chart here shows us not the composition of our waste as a whole, but the waste that's going into the landfill. So you can see there's actually a significant chunk there of that pie chart that says recyclables. These are your regular curbside recyclables. These are definitely things that could be recycled, but actually looking at these other categories, a lot of these other things could be reclaimed, recovered, recycled in one way or another as well. C and D to point out that's construction and demolition waste. Food scraps, those are organics, those can be composted, and some of these other categories as well, all have potential for recovery. So to look more specifically at that, this chart breaks down all these different waste streams, how much we in McLean County are generating, how much we recover, that percentage, but then specifically the raw tons of materials that are being landfilled by our community that all have potential for recovery. And we're going to look at these a little bit more closely. But first, in the new solid waste management plan, we're proposing very ambitious recycling rate goals. These are actually automatic updates of our recycling rate goal, as in contrast in the past, where we set a goal and we work towards it, and wait till we actually reached it before moving forward. We're now setting goals ahead of time, and we're going to work in these 5-year increments to meet these ambitious goals, and we do believe that we can meet them through the following priorities. So we have 6 new priorities based upon recoverable materials that are currently being landfilled. Looking again at that chart I showed you a moment ago, that top one, and we have highlighted in red, 46,507 tons of recyclables are being landfilled right now. There's a couple different ways we can recover more of those recyclables. One of these is commercial recycling. Some businesses recycle, some do not. How can we get more businesses to recycle? This and the other priorities that we're looking at in the new solid waste management plan proposal, we still need to iron out and decide and work as a community to decide the actual initiatives that will help us meet each of these priorities. But we're looking from everything from facilitation and negotiation and working to make this easier for businesses, all the way to the idea of an ordinance, a mandate, which has worked in a lot of communities. Peoria has a very successful commercial recycling ordinance that has been well received and has worked very well. Jumping down, construction demolition waste, 51,155 tons are going into the landfill. So obviously, a second priority here is more recycling of construction demolition waste. We have a permitted construction and demolition waste recycling facility here in our community. Jumping back up again to that recyclables up at the top. So commercial recycling alone, increasing that, will not take care of all of that 46,000. You might recognize this chart showing the drop-off locations for recycling in Normal. This is the only option for many of our residents, those residents being the ones living in multifamily housing. Most of them do not have curbside single-stream recycling. Curbside single-stream recycling, which has really helped increase the recycling participation and rate in our community. So we need to look at this gap. And I know that you hear, and I hear, we all hear often from the students in our community who really want to recycle. So that's a significant portion of the population of multifamily housing. So how do we make it easier for them? Again, looking at the whole range of options, facilitating, incentivizing, or in the end, if necessary, we can look at a mandate to make this happen. Looking at food scraps, organic waste. These are recyclable. So food waste recycling is called composting. We do have a kind of a small-scale commercial food scrap composting operation in our community. It is small scale. It's actually not very scalable at this point. We need a bigger system. We need a local facility. We need to build this bigger and better, and eventually even perhaps consider an option for residents to utilize this for food scrap composting. This is a significant amount of natural resources that we are putting into the hole in the ground, whereas this actually can be recovered and made into revenue-producing products. Jumping down, household hazardous waste. So you all know that this issue that the Ecology Action Center works very closely on with help from all of our local governments. We're one of the very few communities in the entire state of Illinois that still provides for household hazardous waste collection in the absence of the traditional state funding. We're doing actually a very good job at it. The volume of materials continues to grow with our every other year collections. However, it's not enough. We're actually still only collecting a small percentage of the materials that people do generate, all right? And these, while they're not significant in volume, these are the toxic items. These are things we don't want going to landfill at all, period. Whether it's a local landfill or a regional landfill, we want these things disposed of properly. And so we've long talked about a permanent collection facility. This is akin to single-stream curbside recycling. When you remove the barriers to participation, the participation rates will increase significantly. So this is something that needs to happen over the next 20 years for our community, whether it is in our community or a partnership with another Central Illinois community. We need to make disposal of household hazardous waste even more convenient and accessible for people. Priority number 6 is is due to the fact that all of these other efforts are going to take a lot more work and facilitation and staff time, so we need increased outreach and technical assistance to make the other 5 priorities happen. So jumping back to this composition of our landfill material, and noting that I did say earlier that a lot of these materials actually could be recovered. Looking here, just kind of a rough look at how much is currently landfilled versus how much is recycled. But if we start to take slices of that pie and consider, what if we could recover the majority of those items that are recoverable instead of landfilling them, and we compare them then and look at 20 years out, we've inverted this pie chart. And so the majority of our waste, instead of the minority, could be recovered. So looking at this isn't just about landfills, this isn't just about natural resources, this isn't just about the environment, this actually is as well about economic development. So we could maintain the status quo, which is essentially paying to export our waste further away and bury it in the ground. Or we could choose to start to look at our waste as assets, as resources, as materials that could be recovered, and we can help build local businesses, existing ones, and help encourage the establishment of new ones that can help recover these materials and help stimulate our local economy. So this process, as I mentioned, we're in the middle of the 90-day public comment period. Formally, this goes through the county's process, and so the proposed solid waste management plan can be downloaded by the public either from the Ecology Action Center's website or the McLean County website. Hard copies of the proposed plan, are available at the McLean County Clerk's Office or at the Ecology Action Center. Written comments can be submitted by the public to the McLean County Clerk's Office. So I'm open to any questions or comments you may have.
Thank you, Michael. Are there questions or comments? Mr. Fritzen?
Yeah, I presume that the hazardous household waste, since it's a 2-year gap, that in between that, those who aren't accumulating things for that date that shows up, those are just ending up in the landfill, right? They're just probably ending up in the regular waste stream.
That's correct. Landfill, down the drain, down the storm drain, ditches. I mean, I don't know about you, but I increasingly see tube-style CRT TVs in ditches throughout the community, but outside town, outside the city limits.
So when we do have the collection day, where does it go?
So we just had one a month ago, and the funding that the local governments provide, as well as contributions from private businesses and individuals, we raise money to hire a contractor. The contractor is licensed to collect, bulk, transport those materials to their facility. From there, it really depends on what material we're talking about, because there's thousands of different materials, and so some materials some materials can be recycled. If we're talking about mercury and other metals and things like that, they can be reclaimed and put back into the marketplace. Some things can be stabilized and put into a hazardous waste landfill in perpetuity. Some things are not stabilizable, and so they need to be incinerated. Some things are fuel blended, so oil-based materials are often turned into an oil fuel, and so it really just depends on the waste stream.
There's a lot of refining of down the road. Yeah, okay. I know one article in the Wall Street Journal does not make an expert out of anybody, but about a week or so ago, there was a front page article in the Wall Street Journal about China, and this shows you the international political aspect of it, that they're our largest user of our recycled materials, and particularly plastics and paper goods, and that they're being warehoused, in the ports in California because China said that we're not interested in taking it. So how does that trickle back down to us? Because the big component of this is every 5 years, let's increase our goal for recycling.
So curbside automated single-stream recycling has increased participation rates dramatically throughout our community. But now we need to work on the quality of our recycling. And so these issues with China are because of contamination issues. And so the more we can all become better recyclers, not increase our recycling, but do a better job. And so a lot of that falls to the work that the EEC does, but actually the municipalities, Midwest Fiber, all of us who are involved in recycling, we need to all work at more education for better, cleaner recycling.
Is there kind of a, when we went to single stream, did some people take that as kind of a license? I can just throw it all in there now, and so you have to kind of regain some lost territory maybe to where you get to what you're talking about?
Sure, and actually that was known ahead of time. And that is one of the drawbacks of single stream recycling is that, yes, people do tend to contaminate more as opposed to traditional, sorted recycling, multi-stream. And so that was known ahead of time. And now we just, and it's not unique here. I mean, that is across the nation, that there is increased contamination rates. And so we all need to work on that.
Thanks.
Ms. Lorenz?
Fascinating presentation, a lot of information here. You've boiled it down pretty succinctly, so thank you. The interesting thing is the idea and the opportunity for some economic development, and I couldn't help but think to myself that old adage of one man's trash is another man's treasure. And so this certainly what you're suggesting is lending a lot of credence to that. So along those lines, what, if anything, or maybe it's coming from this process, is being done to work with our economic development council here locally, as well as maybe even in the region, towards finding those strategic partnerships or identifying what those might look like?
Sure. And so far, through our 2-year process and some of the focus groups and outreach, we have had representation from the EDC. We've had representation from the Chamber of Commerce. Those are, partners that are critical so far and will be very critical moving forward. Mm-hmm. So keep in mind this proposed plan is still, though, really, it's the outline. It's not the details. Okay. And so this will be an ongoing process with involvement from all necessary partners in order to refine us down to the details and the strategies that are going to be effective for our community and cost effective as well.
Once approved, the idea would be to then really start kind of.
Yes, then the real work starts.
The real work starts. Very good. Thank you.
I could make a comment on that, if I may, Ms. Lorenz, just an example. One of the, what I call the low-hanging fruit items on that pie chart is that C&D recycling. Mm-hmm. It's at 28%, huge, and much of that material is recoverable, recyclable. We do have in our community, we're kind of fortunate, we have a C&D recycle operation. They're properly licensed, and it's tricky to get a license for that sort of thing. In talking with the ownership of that, they are prepared to make a major investment in new equipment to process and sort, and that's, and then jobs, more jobs. So that's definitely an economic development generator. And I would say fairly soon, assuming this plan comes to you in January or thereabouts, and that remains a component, I would say fairly quickly the two cities would want to consider a ordinance which is mandates C&D recycling. Now, you can recycle your own if you choose to, but you otherwise take it to a center, and that in and of itself would be a huge initial step towards increasing that recycling percentage. The other thing that I asked Michael that I'll just ask, and it seems obvious to me that we will soon reach a point where recycling is going to have to be mandated. And, a lot of people do it voluntarily, and that's great, and some people simply choose not to do it, and there's a cost to not doing it. And we mandate all kinds of things. We mandate what and how people dispose of. You can't just go throw stuff in a ditch or in a park or something like that. And we've made recycling so doggone easy for people that I think you reach a point where you gotta say, okay, it's time for everybody to do this, even if you don't really want to and you just as soon not take the time to separate things. it would seem to me, in order to achieve some of these really ambitious goals as you proceed, that's probably going to be part of the, and I'm sure there are a lot of communities have done that. I assume that have mandated recycling.
And there are, I mean, in many cases, you're seeing that more on West Coast or East Coast communities where the landfill pressure, you know, is such, I mean, there aren't landfills nearby. And so the cost of landfilling is so prohibitively expensive that, that everything becomes more practical and cost effective. But we're getting there as well. I mean, we will be a post-landfill community. And so to invest in other strategies that, you know, will save us money in the long run and increase recovery across the board, I think becomes feasible.
Thank you.
Mr. McCarthy?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Really enjoyed it. Mr. Peterson stole my thunder question.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. No. I can say I'm on the same mindset as Mr. Peterson for once. No, just kidding. I'm glad to see that this 20-year vision is entrepreneurial, that it takes a economic development view and a collaborative view of all of the maybe less waste management traditional agencies involved. And certainly listening to you talk, I'm assuming that policy implications are going to be part of a plan, whether we're talking about phased-in mandatory recycling and where we start, or recommendations for all of that, but also more entrepreneurial partnerships. In that way, I'm assuming that we'd get to see some of that too. Good. I'm hoping that those things are part of what gives us real meat and real direction for, you know, what we can do and what role we can play in this obviously looming problem out there. I remember sitting here talking about waste to jet fuel early in my tenure sitting. So I've only been here 5 years, and we've been having waste management conversations about when this is going to close. So this is a good report. I'm glad to hear you're thinking that way, and it's going to come to us and good, solid recommendations. So thank you.
Further? I will emphasize one thing that you brought up in terms of multifamily, and that is I meet regularly with ISU student government, and this is recycling off campus is very, very, very high on their wish list. They want to recycle. It's very difficult for them to do, and there's only so much material that they can put in a bag and throw in their car or their friend's car and take it to one of our dump sites. And so they're really asking for us to help encourage the ownership of multifamily to provide recycling, and that would make a huge difference.
We had representation from ISU Student Government as well as the SEEK Student Environmental Action Coalition in this process, and they're very passionate, and they very much want this happen. I told them we're working on it and that we would make it happen together. So.
Right. Thank you for the presentation. As Mark pointed out, there's no action needed to be taken on this. We'll do that at another date. Before taking a motion for adjournment, are there comments or concerns? Mr. Fritzen?
Yeah, the new warning signs for the Constitution Trail crossings are out there, and I don't know how many people actually will hear anything or watch anything that's said here tonight, but those are not stop signs.
Right.
Cars need to understand those are not stop signs. Those are warnings, and they are alerts to telling you that if there's someone in the crosswalk, then you have to yield the right-of-way to them. But it just causes confusion if cars stop, and now you've got people using the trail uncertain of what the car is going to do, when it used to be the other way around. People in cars always complain about bicycles because they're uncertain of what a bicyclist is going to do. So as people need to read the print on there and understand what the purpose of those is. On the other hand, tonight I was sharing this with Mr. McCarthy because it happened on his street right in front of his house, but bicyclists need to have their hands on the handlebars and ride their bikes in a responsible manner. And we see, we see a lot of conflict in the community, and people get, road rage about bicyclists, and here's why. I'm approaching someone from behind, and I can tell, because I'm on a fairly narrow street that has parking on one side, and it's a fairly, busy street for a residential street, but I can tell that his hands are in his sweatshirt pocket, both of them. So he's riding his bike without his hands on the handlebars, not just one hand, no hands, and so I'm alert to that. Not everyone's going to be alert to that type of thing. And, riding like this, I mean, we all did it when we were kids, riding with no hands, because, hey, cool, look at this, I can balance my bike. But that's not a responsible way to operate a bicycle on a city street. And so, it's a combination of, vehicular traffic, bicyclists, pedestrians, whatever, not just exercising caution, but also common sense. And we need to be alert to those things and watching for those things. And if I was a police officer, I would like to think he would have pulled that guy over.
I would point out that the police department did a couple of days of interactions with the cycling public and issuing tickets and warnings. And I think we had a fair amount of activity in some of the stops that they did. And I sat back and observed one, and it was likely a ticketable scenario, but the officer spent some time talking to the person, explaining to them that they needed to obey the rules of the road. And I hope we see more of those as time permits, because education and enforcement is really key to making this whole thing work.
I just want to add a little to the bikes. I've gotten some feedback from my various populations. Mine are skewed towards great idea, because I come from active populations, so they're going to be supportive of this sort of thing. But in one way, I'm glad to hear what's going on in these intersections, that people are stopping even though they don't have to. What I think is happening, whether we like the immediate reaction versus the long-term hope for these, it's always going to be, with a change, it's going to be a difficult transition. But what that means are cars are paying attention to where pedestrians cross the street a lot. No, we don't want them to stop proactively when nobody's in the crosswalk creating a traffic jam or confusion. But I've also heard the same feedback that the runners and cyclists are also equally cautious and not sure what to do. I happened to be crossing Vernon when the police were doing their operation, and I duly put my foot down, as I'm supposed to do, and the car stopped. And we paused and looked at the car, and the exact problem that we all fear would happen did happen. We made a motion to start in when the car in the second lane went whizzing by the car that was stopped. But what it did for us is also treat the cars with equal amount of respect and concern that the cars seem to be now giving the cyclists and runners. So your point is well taken, Mr. Fritz, and hopefully it's educating all of us. It's getting all of us to pay attention at those high points of intersection when vehicles and people on feet and people on bikes are coming into contact with each other, and it's making everybody more aware rather than everybody continue to take one side or the other for granted. So I hope that smooths out, that we figure it out in a more successful way, but I'm glad that people are starting to be more attentive and more cautious at those points in the road.
Mr. Peterson?
Just to add a comment, and frankly, we expected a lot of this, and this is why it's a trial.
Yeah.
And this is why these were not deployed all over town, and it's why these were not deployed on, a number of four-lane streets where there are some issues. I do believe that people will get used to them and they'll understand, how to function with these devices, but we're going to be monitoring that, and I know they've been used in many cities successfully. So I don't really see that Normal is that much different than those places. But there's clearly some confusion initially. I'm hoping that a month from now people will become accustomed to them. They'll understand them, both pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists. But it's not perfect, and there are situations that can lead to some confusion. And so we'll have to just keep a close eye on that. I do think in the long run, they're going to create a safer environment. They're not perfect, but they're going to, long run, be safer for both pedestrians and motorists. But we're gonna keep an eye on them, and then we'll come back to you and report what the experience has been. But it sounds like we're all getting regular reports from people, and so I'm sure that will continue, and we'll hopefully see what happens in the coming weeks.
On the topic, since we're talking about it, quick question for staff. There's one on Northtown. I don't remember that being part of our conversation. Was it when we approved these a month
Well, I think we have 5.
ago?
Northtown. Looking
Northtown.
for Wayne or
Yeah, remember.
Gene. I think we have 5, Northtown, Rab, and then 3 others.
Shelbourne, Willow, Locust.
Lincoln?
Is that 5 or is that 6? That'd be 6. So I don't,
I
maybe
just
we
didn't
didn't talk
remember
about
Northtown being on
Northtown.
our
I
list originally, and
I don't know for sure. Maybe we didn't.
Yeah, we
You-
can
Oh,
check.
yes.
Yeah, those are all kind of 2-lane sections, and that's, where we deployed. So some of them, like, Northtown and Rab, a little bit higher speed, but still 2-lane streets and very visible. We are also having an issue with parking on some of them closer to universities, so we might adjust the length away from the trail where we allow parking, just to give some folks, they feel uncomfortable being that close to parked cars. So we might come to council at some point to adjust that parking.
I think Lincoln was the one where we had some
Lincoln
problems.
and-
We're going to
yeah.
go ahead and make that
Locust,
change if we
yeah.
haven't already. And we've also lost a couple
We have.
signs we've
Yeah.
had to replace already.
Oh, really?
They're on a dorm room wall.
Well,
Or connected to some bumper, yeah.
could be.
Getting dragged under somebody's car.
Further comments, concerns?
I have one.
Yes.
If everybody else is done. I just want to acknowledge there was a somewhat bittersweet announcement today that one of our staff members is leaving us shortly. Shelley Berlin-Meyer is moving on, and I say bittersweet. Wish she wasn't, but we're happy for her and wish her the best and thank her for her service to date. So, and she'll still be around the community, and we told her we're gonna maintain her phone number and call her once in a while when we need some help. So she's graciously offered to do that. So best of luck, Shelley.
Okay. Motion for adjournment.
So moved. Second.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye, we are adjourned.
I had to do a lot longer than I thought. Probably because my brain hurts.